האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening. Dobra v'yetcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Chayei Sarah. We're going to do the first part of section number 9, Os Tes. We're only doing the first part because it's a very long piece, but we'll get into some fascinating and I would say unusual ideas and happenings. Let's first open with a few psukim from the Parsha. This is Perek Chaf Daled, Psukim Lamed Zayin through Lamed Tes. These psukim come from Eliezer. Eliezer, Eved Avraham, the Avraham servant, is being quoted. Eliezer, of course, in a very famous section of the Parsha, is sent by Avram Avinu to go back to his birthplace and to find a wife from his family for Yitzchak. And as we'll see, Avram is extremely careful in his instructions to Eliezer, and Eliezer repeats the conversation to Rivka's father, Besuel, and her brother, Lavan. That's who Eliezer is speaking with here. So this starts with Pasuk Lamed Zayin. Vayashbi'eni Adoni Lemor. And my master made me take an oath, Lo sikach isha livini, that you will not take a wife from my son, mi benos haKnani, from the daughters of Canaan, asher anochi yoshev be'artzo, that I am dwelling in its land, in his land, in the land of Canaan. So Eliezer started off by making it clear that this mission was a sacred mission and that Avraham took so seriously that he made Eliezer, his servant, take an oath and swear to carry out the mission faithfully. And the first part of the oath was that Eliezer would not, under any circumstances, find a Canaanite wife, which all the local women generally were Canaanite women. It was in the land of Canaan, after all. And for Yitzchak, Avram was totally opposed to that. Im lo el beis avi telech ve'el mishpachti. You should go to the house of my father and to my family. Ve'lokachta isha livni, and you should take a wife for my son Yitzchak from there. Va'omar el Adoni, and I said to my master, Ulai lo selech ha'isha acharai. Perhaps the woman will not come back with me. Eliezer is relating that he asked a very pertinent and practical question. What if I get there and to your family and your birthplace and I find an appropriate woman for Yitzchak, but she won't agree, or her family won't agree to send her back on this very arduous, difficult, long journey all the way back to Eretz Canaan, in which case they knew they would not see her again in all likelihood. What if they don't agree? So Avraham goes on to say that Hashem will send his malach and make sure that you're successful and make sure that everything goes well. But if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't work for any reason, then Avram says to Eliezer, you are freed from this oath, and you can come back, and then you don't have to worry about the oath that you took. After that, you'll be able to come back without the woman, return home without her if she absolutely, or the family absolutely, refuses. Okay, let's jump right into the Zera Shimshon, who's going to focus on the fact that when Eliezer said ulai, perhaps, it's written in the Torah without the vav. We call that chaser, missing the vav. And what Chazal, Rashi actually brings down from Chazal that we learn from that, and that's going to be how the Zera Shimshon begins this drush, this section. Pasuk, ulai lo selecha isha acharoi. Perhaps the woman will not come after me, come back to marry Yitzchak. Perish Rashi. Rashi explains, Elai kisiv, The word ulai, which is normally spelled Aleph Vav Lamed Yud, is written without the Vav, so it's Aleph Lamed Yud, which looks like the word Eli, to me. It seems as if Eliezer, on some level, was saying something about to me. If the woman doesn't come back, then to me. It should be to me. So Rashi explains, Bas ha-yisolol Eliezer. Eliezer had a daughter, v'hoya mechazer limtso ila, and he was trying to find a pretext, shel yomar lo Avraham lifnos elov, that Avraham would end up turning to him, to Eliezer, lehasio bito, to marry off his daughter, v'chule, etc. So Rashi introduces a really kind of jarring idea, because we know when we read the story that Eliezer seems to be the epitome of loyalty to his master Avraham. He's doing everything he conceivably can to make this mission, his mission, successful. And Rashi tells us, actually, Eliezer had a kind of hidden motive, a hidden idea going on here. His hidden idea was that instead of bringing back a woman from Avraham's birthplace and family, as Avram had instructed him and as he had sworn to do, Eliezer was thinking, on some level, I would like Yitzchak, my master's son, to marry my daughter. That's what he dreamed of. That was Eliezer's aspiration. And therefore, the Torah writes, to hint this to us, the Torah writes the word ulai, perhaps the woman won't come back, as Eli. If the woman won't come back, then I have a chance, Eliezer is thinking. Then Yitzchak might be able to marry my daughter as a kind of plan B or C, right? Plan A is for me to bring back a woman from Abraham's family and birthplace. But if that doesn't work, then I might have a chance to bring my daughter into the equation, and perhaps she will be able to, Yitzchak will marry her. That's what Rashi teaches us, and that's what we learn from the spelling of the word ulai, without the vav, and therefore written like Eli, to me. Hikshu HaMefarshim. The commentators ask, Loma nosan hakosuv remez zeh. Why did the Torah place this hint about the missing vav in the word ulai b'chazoras divorim she'omar Eliezer lelavan, when Eliezer repeats his words to Lavan? Why is that the place where the Torah chose to put in this hint? Visham kosav ulai chaser, and that's where the word ulai is written without the vav. V'lo ramazeh batachila, and the Torah does not give us this hint or this allusion in the beginning. Miyad, immediately, kisha Omar Eliezer la Avraham, when Eliezer said to Avraham, ulai lo soveh, perhaps the woman will not wish to return. Sheshom hayaroi lichtov ulai chaser. There, in the beginning, when Eliezer first responded to this oath that Avraham was giving to Eliezer, and Eliezer said these words ulai, maybe perhaps the woman won't want to return. The commentators say, look at the word, it's written correctly. It's written Aleph Vav Lamed Yud, perhaps. Why didn't the Torah at that point, at the beginning of the story, why didn't the Torah write the word Aleph Lamed Yud to give us the hint that Rashi picked up on when Eliezer repeated the story to Lavan? Early on is when presumably Eliezer had in mind that maybe his daughter could marry Yitzchak at some point if the woman from Avram's birthplace did not want to return. This is a very, very powerful question. Let's pause for a moment to make sure we understand it. The starting point is to realize that we have the same words repeated. Eliezer's says the words to Avraham in the very beginning when Avraham, before Eliezer has left on his mission, before he's gone anywhere, Avraham calls him in and tells him he's giving him the mission to find a wife for Yitzchak, and he makes him take the oath, the Shavua. And after Avraham tells him the words of the language of the oath, Eliezer is concerned about his ability to keep the oath, to fulfill the mission, and he says, "Ulai lo sover ha'isha," perhaps the woman will not want to return with me. So the commentators say that moment when Eliezer first said, perhaps, isn't it make sense? Isn't it logical? Doesn't it make sense that he had in mind at that point from the very beginning that somehow if the woman did not come back from his master's birthplace, from Avram's birthplace and her family, then he would want his daughter to be considered perhaps to marry Yitzchak. So right in the beginning, the word ulai should have been written without the vav as Eli to me, because Eliezer must have had it in mind. Instead, the Torah does not. The Torah chooses not to write the word missing the vav and thereby giving us the hint to Eliezer's secret hidden thoughts. And it only writes it when Eliezer repeats the conversation to Lavan and Rivka's family later on. Why would the Torah do that? As if somehow Eliezer only thought of it then, but did not have it in mind in the beginning. That is the strong question. Next paragraph. V'od yesh ledaktek, and we also need to analyze ma ilo shayich bekan. What is the pretext that is relevant here? What does it mean Eliezer was searching for a pretext to bring his daughter into consideration? Rashi seemingly could have said something much more concise and more clearer. Bas hoyusalo, Rashi could have said Eliezer had a daughter. Yomer lo Avram, and he was trying to get Avram to say to him, to Eliezer, let's consider your daughter Eliezer, my faithful servant, to be the wife of my son Yitzchak. That's all Rashi had to say. Duloshan ilah, but Rashi using this word ilah, pretext, nira shehi kemo tachbula ve'arma. It would appear Rashi used that word to say that Eliezer had some kind of strategy and trick almost, some kind of clever move that Eliezer was trying to put into place to kind of manipulate the situation. So the second question is simply to say, why is it that Rashi depicts what Eliezer was doing as an ilah, a searching for a pretext or having a strategy, something somewhat tricky and clever, when it could have been seemingly could have presented in a very straightforward way? Namely, Eliezer was hoping that if the woman from Avram's family didn't come back, that he would be able to, that Avram would consider Eliezer's daughter as a wife for Yitzchak. Where was the strategy? Where was the clever trick that seems to be involved in Eliezer's search for a pretext? That's the second question. So we have two questions that the Zera Shimshon opens the piece with. Let's move to the next paragraph. Bottom of the column on the right. V'nireh, it would appear, she'achas peruka lechaverta, that by answering one question, we can answer the other question. These two questions, Zera Shimshon says, are related, and they're related so closely that if you can answer one, you'll be able to answer the second question also. Shaharei Kesiv, because it's written regarding Eliezer when he meets Rivka, Vayikach ha'ish nezem zohav. It says, and the man Eliezer took a golden nose ring, v'lo peresh hakosov ma asabo. And the Torah doesn't say what Eliezer did with the golden nose ring. As the Torah does explain regarding the golden bracelets. It tells us that Eliezer took out these golden bracelets and put them on her arms, on Rivka's arms. Shehi nicham ayadeha. He placed the bracelets on her arms, or her hands, her wrists. Umistama, we may assume, moving now to the top of the column on the left, Yeshalanu makom lomar, we have a reasonable position to say, Shekidsha bishvil Yitzchak im hanezem, that Eliezer betrothed Rivka to Yitzchak, his master's son, with the nose ring. V'zehu loshon vayikach ha'ish, and that is exactly what is indicated with the words the Torah uses about Eliezer taking out the nose ring. Vayikach ha'ish, and the man took the shayich be'inyan hakidushin. The word to take, vayikach, is a language that is used in the Torah to refer to the act of kiddushin, of the first stage of marrying a woman. Kidde amrina, and as we say in Maseches Kiddushin, right there on the first page, Gemar kicha kicha. The Torah has the Gemara, I should say, presents us with a Zera Shimshon, which is a way of comparing two parts of the Torah, two statements in the Torah, because the same word is used. And so the Gemara tells us that when the word kicha, taking a woman to betroth her, to perform the first step of marriage, that word is used by the Torah. And the same word kicha, taking, is used regarding the acquisition of property, of real estate. So kicha, we see that the word kicha is used in reference to performing kiddushin. So therefore, it makes sense for the Zera Shimshon to tell us that when it says vayikach ha'ish and Eliezer took the nose ring, and it doesn't say what he did with it, it means he didn't give it to Rivka as a gift. He gave it to her as an act of kiddushin, as a way of betrothing her to Yitzchak. Next paragraph. V'achar kach noson lo hatzimidin, and after he did that, then he gave her the bracelets, besora sivlonos, according to the rules of a bridal gift, or bridal gifts. So two different things happened here, which we easily could miss when we learned the psukim. The nezem, the nose ring, was like a ring that a groom gives to his or that a man gives to his fiance, or a groom gives to the kala to do kiddushin. That's what the nezem, the golden nose ring, was used for by Eliezer when he gave it to Rivka. But the sivlon, but the tzimidim, but the bracelets, those were bridal gifts that he was giving to Rivka after he did kiddushin, and that's when bridal gifts were traditionally given. First, you would have the stage of kiddushin, the first step of the marriage ceremony, and then gifts would be given. Then there'd be a break in time until you completed the marriage ceremony with the second stage called nisuin. And in between there, after the first step of kiddushin, that's when the groom, or in this case, the groom's representative, Eliezer, would give the bridal gifts. The Isa b'Baba Basra Perik Mishemei Staf Kufmen Vav. It states in the Gemara, in the tractate of Baba Basra, and the chapter called Mishemes, Hasholeach Sivlonos Leves Chomiv. A man who sends bridal gifts to the house of his father-in-law. So this is talking about a man, a groom, who has done the stage of kiddushin with the kala, but they haven't done the second stage. They're not living together, and nisuin, the second stage, hasn't happened. So now, after the first stage of kiddushin, he sends the bridal gifts, these sivlonos, to his father-in-law's house for his intended, for the kala. Sholach shameya mana. If he sends gifts that are worth 100 mana, which is a very large amount of money. V'ochal sham seudas chosan afilu bedinar, and then he sits down to the festive, celebratory meal that they have for the chosan, for him, even if he only eats an amount of 1 dinar. So he gives this elaborate, extremely expensive set of bridal gifts. Then he comes and he sits down at the meal and has a piece of cake, he has a roll, he has only a little bit to eat, nowhere near the worth, the value of the gifts, the sivlonos that he sent beforehand. Einon nigbin. The gifts, the sivlonos, cannot be taken back. Lo ochal shom seudas chasan. However, if the groom sent the gifts and then he did not eat at this meal that they had, this seuda, he doesn't eat at all, he doesn't partake, hare elu nigbin. Then the gifts that he gave, the sivlonos, can be taken back if the wedding doesn't proceed. If it's called off after Kiddushin and there's no nisuin and the families agree that it's not going forward to be completed, then the chassan has the right to say, I want those very expensive bridal gifts to be returned to me, and he is allowed to take them back because he didn't eat at the meal. Eating at the meal was the sign that the chassan was moving ahead with full force and wanted the bride to have the beautiful gifts, the expensive gifts, but by refraining and refusing to eat at the meal, it showed the chassan had some doubts in his mind and his heart, and he did not want the sivlonos, the bridal gifts, to be conclusively acquired by the bride. So the Gemara continues and asks, Shulucho mai. What if the messenger of the groom comes and doesn't eat at the meal? In other words, the halacha allows a chassan to send a shaliach, a messenger, to perform the act of kiddushin. And as we see with Eliezer in the Torah, that's exactly what he was doing. So the Gemara says, what if instead of the chassan coming, let's say the chassan sent these beautiful, expensive, elaborate gifts as sivlonos, as bridal gifts, and the shaliach who had done the kiddushin originally chooses not to eat at this celebratory meal. What happens then? So the Gemara answers, Ochal Shom Tanan. The Mishnah stated that if the chassan and only the chassan eats at the meal, then the gift is irrevocable. But if his shliach doesn't eat at the meal, then that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the shliach does. Excuse me. If the shliach does eat at the meal, the Gemara is asking what happens. What happens if the chassan himself does not eat at the meal, but the shliach eats at the meal? So the Gemara answers that's not a binding on the chassan, because the Mishnah had stated ochal sham. If the chassan eats at the meal, then it's a done deal, and the gifts, the sivlonos, are acquired by the kala, and they can't be taken back. But if the shaliach of the chassan eats, that doesn't accomplish anything. That doesn't make the transaction go through in an irrevocable form, because it's only if the chassan eats at the meal that the significance of that action becomes important and has halachic status. Uperish Rashbam, and the Rashbam explains, if you have Rashi in your text, you can see the parentheses tells us that it should say Rashbam instead of Rashi. So Perish Rashbam, the Rashbam explains, the mashmahu atzmo. It teaches us that the chassan himself has to eat, but if the chassan shaliach, his messenger, eats, that does not bind the chassan in terms of these gifts, and the gifts can be returned if the marriage is not completed. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from the Gemara with also the added explanation of Rashba. Vehine Eliezer ha-yeshaliach. So now Zera Shimshon says, let's take this information and plug it back into our story. Eliezer wasn't the chassan, he wasn't the groom here. He was the messenger, actually, of the groom's father, but he was representing Yitzchak. Ukfar shalach hasivlonos, and he already gave the bridal gifts. So Eliezer gave the tzimidim, the bracelets, to Rivka after he gave her the nose ring as a way of performing kiddushin between Rivka and Yitzchak. Uveinim hoya ochel shom olav, and whether or not Eliezer ate or not, imheim lo yirtzu litein lo Rivka, if the family decided not to send Rivka with him, hoyu hasivlonos chosrim, no matter what, the bridal gifts would be returned. V'lama lo rotza lechol asher diber divarav. So why did Eliezer make a strong point of saying that he would not eat when they offered him food until he had told them his story? So this question is very important for us to understand. This point, I should say, is very important for us to understand. Zera Shimshon says that if we look in the story, we'll see that Eliezer, Rivka's family, offers Eliezer food. They say to him, come inside, come in, bring your men, we'll give you a place for the camels. This is Lavan talking. And we want to give you food. We know you've just come on a very long, difficult journey. We want to put down food and drink for you. And Eliezer refuses to eat or drink until he tells them what his mission was about and why he's there, and that his plan is to take Rivka back to be the wife of Yitzchak. So the Zera Shimshon wants to understand, why did Eliezer refuse to eat? And that's why the Zera Shimshon brings in this Gemara from Baba Basra, which talks about bridal gifts and whether or not they can be taken back if the wedding plans fall apart. So the Zera Shimshon says, whether or not Eliezer, as the shaliach, the messenger of Yitzchak, ate food or not is completely irrelevant. So why would Eliezer refuse to eat, as if he was kind of implying, if I eat, then the bridal gifts, I won't be able to bring them back to Yitzchak and to Avraham. I won't be able to take them back if you don't let me bring Rivka home. If these plans fall apart, I won't be able to get the wedding gifts back. And it's as if he was saying, I'm not eating for that, because of that concern, because of that purpose, as if his eating from the meal was relevant. But his eating was completely irrelevant. It's only if Yitzchak was there, if the chassan was there and the chassan eats from the meal, then the gifts, the sivlonos, can't be taken back. But Yitzchak was many miles, or parsangs. Yitzchak was very far away. And so there was no chance of the gift of sivlonos being irretrievable. So what's going on with Eliezer refusing to eat? Next paragraph. Elevadai, but definitely she'Eliezer nohagas atzmo. We see Eliezer was conducting himself betachbula umirma, with a stratagem, with a kind of trick, kedei sheyachsheduhu, in order that Rivka's family would suspect him, shehu rotze likach es Rivka la'atzmo, as if he, Eliezer, wanted to take Rivka for himself, to be his own wife, velo, and not, continuing to the next page on the right, velo liyitzchak, and not for Yitzchak. So now, in case we haven't been surprised sufficiently to learn about Eliezer's secret plan for Yitzchak to marry his daughter, now Zera Shimshon says he's trying to get Rivka's family to think that Eliezer, has come there to marry Rivka. He wants them to think that. The proof to this is that Eliezer refused to eat when they wanted to give him food. he acted as if he didn't want to eat, because if he ate, he would lose the gifts that he had already given, the bracelets that he already given, amongst other things, to Rivka. Vehem bevadai lo yirtzu litein Rivka leisha leeved, and Rivka's family certainly would not want to give Rivka to Eliezer, a servant, as a wife. That would not be an appropriate match. O lefi shehoya mitchila eved kilakamon. Or even if Eliezer was no longer a servant, and Eved at this moment, he had originally been a servant. He's Eved Avraham. He's the servant of Avraham. And they, of course, knew that. And he tells that to them and when he introduces himself, he's Eved Avraham. So even though we might say, as the Zera Shimshon says later on in this piece, that Eliezer had become a freed man when Avram Avinu sent him on his mission to find a wife for Yitzchak. We'll get to that point in a moment at the end of this paragraph. But so either way, either if Eliezer was presently in Eved when he was talking to Rivka's family, or he had been in Eved but had been freed by Avraham when he was sent on this mission, either way, they would not want Rivka to marry him. Shechirpa hi lahem. It would be a disgrace for their family. Ve'oz, and then if they refused to send Rivka because they thought Eliezer wanted to marry Rivka for himself, if they refused, who potter mishvuas Avraham, Eliezer would end up being freed from the oath that Avraham made him take. And then he would be able to suggest his daughter for Yitzchak, because he would have gone out from the status of oror, of cursed, which is a word used for avodim, uvolichlal baruch, and he would have come into the status of a blessed person, meaning a freed man, not an eved any longer. Dahainu michlal eved lechlal ger tzedek, because Eliezer had moved from the status of a servant, an eved, to the status of a ger tzedek, a righteous convert, a full-fledged Jewish person, a member of Abraham's group. And the same way we consider Abraham as the first Jewish person, Eliezer would have been what would have been considered a member of Abraham's religious group, a ger tzedek, a righteous convert. V'zehu ha'ilah she'omar ulai choser. And this was the pretext or the trick that Eliezer was trying to have happen when that the Torah alludes to with ulai, perhaps, but spelled Eli, to me. The mashma Eli, the Aleph Lamed Yud, means to me, not ulai, perhaps. Klomar, meaning to say, Shahayarotze Rivka la'atzmo, he wanted to make it appear that he had a desire to marry Rivka for himself, ulefize lotele ha'isha acharav, and he knew that if the family realized that that's what he was trying to hint to, he didn't come right out and say it, I'm here to marry Rivka. Of course, he couldn't say that. The family would send a message to Avraham saying, what's going on over there in Eretz Canaan that you're sending a servant to marry Rivka? Why was anyone thinking we would ever agree to that? So he didn't come out and say it, but he hinted to it by not eating at the meal and making them think he wasn't eating because he was thinking he would be the chassan, he would be the groom, and therefore they would refuse to send Rivka, which would accomplish his entire goal here, or at least I shouldn't say his entire goal. This would accomplish his hidden secret goal of making it so that Rivka wasn't sent back, and then he'd come home and say they refused to send Rivka, and therefore Avraham, my master, Avraham, my former master, I should say, would you consider my daughter as a suitable wife for Yitzchak? So our minds are kind of blown if we've never learned this before. Let's pause to make sure we understand. And also we have to understand that the Zera Shimshon has now answered his two questions that he posed in the very beginning. So let's put it all together before we do a little more. The Zera Shimshon's question was, what was the big strategy and trick that Eliezer was trying to pull off? We don't see that hinted to. We don't see that in the psukim, that Eliezer had this master plan that's kind of a hidden strategy. What was that? That was one question. And two, why does the Torah, the really big fundamental question, the first question, why does the Torah only change the spelling of the word ulai and take out the vav when Eliezer is repeating what his conversation with Avraham that happened beforehand, before he was sent on his mission? Why not change the word in that original conversation? Because presumably Eliezer was already thinking that he'd like his daughter to marry Yitzchak in the beginning, when Avraham gave him his mission to go bring back a wife from his birthplace. So why did the Torah wait to change the word and take out the vav? Those are the two questions. So the Zera Shimshon says the master strategy, the master plan that Eliezer had was, if he could somehow sabotage the mission and make it so that the family did not agree to send Rivka, then he could come home Rivka-less. He could come home without Rivka, in which case he thought he would be able to possibly convince Abraham to consider his own daughter, Eliezer's own daughter, to be a wife for Yitzchak. That was his hidden strategy, his hidden plan that he was trying to accomplish. How could he make it that the family wouldn't send Rivka without coming right out and kind of messing things up? Well, he did it by not eating the food. By not eating the food, Eliezer hoped that they offered him. Eliezer hoped that the family would think, wait a minute, that's a strange thing for us. This man must be starving. He must be so hungry and thirsty that he hasn't eaten in all this time during the trip through the desert. Why is he not eating? Oh, he's not eating because he knows that if he is planning to marry Rivka and he doesn't eat at this meal, then he can take back those expensive gifts, those golden bracelets and gifts that he gave to Rivka as sivlonos, as bridal gifts. He can take them all back. But if he eats, then the rule is that he wouldn't be able to take them back. But all of that only applies if Eliezer, is thinking of marrying Rivka. And that is precisely what Eliezer wanted Rivka's family to become suspicious of. Does this man, Eliezer, who's saying words about bringing Rivka back to Yitzchak, which would be a wonderful thing, that's what he seems to be saying. He's talking the talk, but he seems to secretly be planning to possibly marry Rivka himself, and that the family would never ever agree to. And therefore, if they thought that was the case, then they would not send Rivka with Eliezer. So that was the plan, and that's why when Eliezer was speaking to Avraham the first time, the Torah says ulai spelled correctly, because at that moment, Eliezer did not think it would be possible for his daughter to be considered. And we'll see why that was in the next paragraph. Umishum hachi, and because of this, Ramzo hakosov, the Torah hints bekan here bechazoras devarim, in the repetition of the words sha'amar Eliezer leLavan, that Eliezer said to Lavan, kedei lahodienu tachbula zo, in order to make known to us this secret plan, ulahashmienu hatam shelo ratza lechol, and to make known to us why Eliezer didn't wish to eat asher diber devarim, until he had spoken the words that he wanted to say. V'zehu hatam shehischa lomar, and this is also the reason that Eliezer starts his presentation to the family, to Rivka's family, by saying, Vayomer Eved Avraham Anochi, I am Avraham's servant. He wanted to make sure that they understood that, even though, as we already mentioned, he had been freed. So he's saying, I am Avraham's servant. That's not my status anymore, but that's my identity. And he didn't want them to miss that he was an Eved, because his whole plan depended upon them rejecting sending Rivka with him. Next paragraph. Inami yesh lomar, or we can also say Shemitchila shahaya eved, in the beginning, when Eliezer was a servant, his status hadn't changed. Lo hayulo mokum lomar, he had no possible way of saying litein bito leYitzchak, that Yitzchak should marry his daughter. Shahari Eved ein lo yachas, and Eved doesn't have any kind of lineage. The Avram Adarabba, and Avraham just the opposite. Haya mevakesh isha leYitzchak miyaches hogun. Abraham wanted to make sure that Yitzchak married a woman who had very clear and very distinguished lineage. Omnam, but however, Ata now, Sheyotza Michal Eved, that Eliezer was no longer an Eved, because when Abraham sent him on the mission and he left Canaan, he freed perforce. He had to free Yitzchak because Yitzchak had to become a member of Abraham's religious group. We could call it being Jewish in order to carry out the mission. And that's discussed later in this piece. Shapir Ramaz HaKosov Bikan Ulai Chosir. And that's why only now, after Eliezer had become eligible to have his daughter marry Yitzchak, the Torah gives us the hint about Ulai as Eli, missing the vav. V'zehu nami shekosav Rashi shehaya mevakesh ila. That's what Rashi is explaining, that Eliezer had this secret plan, shahare lefia emes, because in truth, av sheyotzehu ato michlal eved, even though he was no longer an eved, halo bito shekfar nolda mina eved he shifcha. It didn't help his daughter that he was freed, because she was born when Eliezer was an Eved, and she was therefore considered a shifcha, a maidservant. Ve'ein lo yachas, and she didn't have any of the lineage that Avram was looking for. Next paragraph. Ela kishelo yirtzu laseis lo Rivka. If he could get Rivka's family to not agree to send her, she'oz Avraham misratze likach isha mibenos Canaan, in which case Avraham would have been willing to perhaps consider a wife from the benos Canaan, even though Avram's starting point was that was inconceivable. He might have been willing to do it if the family wouldn't send back Rivka. K'moshe Pirish Rashi b'per Gimel de Kedushin, as Rashi explains in the 3rd chapter of Maseches Kiddushin, that Avraham would have been open to having Yitzchak marry a Canaanite woman if there was no choice, if there was no other option. Va'ayin sham, you can see there in the Gemara in Kiddushin. Avsher shebenidoin zeh, perhaps in such a circumstance, in such a situation, tavo ez svara leEliezer, Eliezer might have been able to present a logical reason, shebito adifa minahu, that his daughter would be preferable to a Canaanite woman, ve'od, and more so, sheyicholim l'shacher af osa, just like they freed Eliezer, just like Avram freed Eliezer, they could free his daughter, and then she would no longer have the stigma of a shifcha, of a maidservant, and she would be eligible possibly to marry Yitzchak. So we're only going to go this far in the piece tonight. And what we've seen is that hiding in the words of the Parsha and brought out by Rashi and Chazal is the fact that Eliezer had not only had a desire that Yitzchak would marry his daughter, which is the most reasonable thing in the world. Eliezer loved Avram and his family and loved Yitzchak and was completely devoted to them and knew what special, absolutely unique tzaddikim, righteous people they were. So any man with a daughter would want his daughter to marry Yitzchak if that was possible, and that's what Eliezer wanted. So we learn that. But in addition to that, we learn that Eliezer took it much farther, and his plan was to get the family to think that he might himself want to marry Rivka. They would, of course, reject that out of hand if that's what they suspected, and therefore they wouldn't send Rivka, leaving Eliezer the ability to return home and to say to Avraham, you freed me, I'm a Jewish man, I'm a Ger Tzedek, And I'd like to suggest my daughter, who, if you wish, you can free her also. So there's no stigma involved here at all. And my daughter can marry Yitzchak. Of course, all of this is only in the land of wishful thinking for Eliezer, because the family sends Rivka, and Rivka comes back to marry Yitzchak, of course. And so Eliezer's, at least on this kind of hidden level, his plans and his hopes and aspirations for his daughter to marry Yitzchak do not come to pass, do not come to fruition. But however, he does successfully accomplish the mission that Avram sent him on, and he's used by Chazal as the paradigm of a servant who goes all out to fulfill the mission that his master gave him. Yasher Koch for joining in the learning this week in the Zera Shimshon on Chayei. We look forward, God willing, to learning together in the Zera Shimshon on next week's parsha.